Well, welcome to the Eyes on Jesus podcast with Drew and Tim. We're so excited to be with you today. We have an exciting topic for you, a two-parter. So
Yeah.
we encourage you to listen to today, ask questions, give us your comments, but we're going to dive into an exciting topic for trends for this year for churches, and we'll talk more about that. But before we do, Drew, how are you doing today? Good to see you.
Good to see you and good to catch back up with you after the holidays. I'm doing well. It is a cold but sunny day here in North Carolina. What's it like in Arizona?
Right now we're like at 70 flat, so it's pretty
Wow.
nice. Yeah.
70 and it's
We had some cold
sunny
days
and
of
there's
50s,
just
but now we're back in the 70s.
cold days of 50.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so 50 is the high today. And this weekend, we're talking about church trends. This weekend, it's going to be like 19 degrees when Sunday service happens. And so we're going to have some hot chocolate for people because the church trend would be to wake up, find out it's cold outside and not come to church. So
Yeah.
we're going to, we're going to get that. We're going to get that ready.
There's a lot of churches
Um,
that closed down this past weekend because of the snow in Texas and
yeah,
all over the place.
yeah,
And then I saw
yeah,
a video of what was it, the one of the games, the Bills game or something with the family like
yep.
pushing through like these, thick snow in the seats. And I shared that and I was like, man, I wish Christians were more, that eager to come to church as the football
Right,
fans were.
right.
And
I
then all these
shared it.
comments are like, "Oh, you don't need church, and I can be a Christian and not go to church." So that led to some interesting
Yeah,
conversations, but
I'm sure. Yeah, I never have understood what people can push past for things that ultimately will be irrelevant. But that's another, maybe we could do that as a podcast
yeah,
episode
that's a topic.
sometime. Today, we're talking about something really cool. We're talking about, like you said, church trends. And I'm really looking forward to getting into this because I'm curious as to what you're seeing and curious as to not just what's happening at your church, but what you're seeing, globally here. And are we like in alignment with where church is going? Am I seeing things you're not seeing? You're seeing things I'm not seeing. Does this article see things that maybe we need to get a move on? So yeah, I'm pretty pumped about our conversation.
Tell us about your cat allergy.
Oh yeah. So I just did mention that. So your cat came in the room and I told you about my cat. So last Sunday, this is great. Last Sunday, I got done with the second service and like I do, I'm hugging people, giving fives to people, shaking hands, kissing babies, all that fun stuff, right? So I get to the back and start talking with this young lady and she says, "What's up with your eye?" And I was like, What?" She goes, "What's up with your eye?" And I was like, "I don't know. What's up with my eye?" She was like, "It's really red." I was like, "Oh, geez." And I turned and looked at somebody else and they were like, "Gosh," like, they're like, "Yo, your eye is so red." I was like, "Okay, hold on. I'm going to leave." So I was in my mind, I'm like, did I just do a sermon and stand in front of everybody with like a huge eye? I was like, what are we doing? So I ran to the restroom, looked in the mirror and dude, like watering and as red as can be, swollen underneath. And then like my tongue started swelling up and I started feeling like an itchy throat. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm having an allergic reaction to something. For the life of me, we couldn't figure out what the allergic reaction could have been to. Like,
Mm,
was it a perfume that somebody was wearing? Whatever, right? So I'm sitting now on the bathroom floor with a washcloth around my neck because I think I'm going to pass out. That's the level I got to.
wow.
And out of my eye, I pull out a cat hair.
What?
I hugged someone who owns
Oh, it's on
cats and it was on their clothes. And somehow I'm a short dude. So when I go in for the hug, sometimes I'm only shoulder level.
there.
Somehow a cat hair got literally in my eyeball. And I swear to you, I about like blacked out. like I about faded. It put this little cat hair put me on my butt so fast. And it was such a great reminder of how strong I think I am, but ultimately how weak I can be. And yeah, like volunteers had to come and help me stand up, like had to help me get to my car, had to make sure I was good to drive, like all these things. It was an ordeal. It was certainly not something that I want to do again. But yeah, like, dude, cat, like I can't do the cat thing. I can't do it. So whenever somebody says, "Hey, Drew, do you want to come over? Do you want to do dinner? Do you want to hang out?" Something like that. I have two questions. The first one is, "Do you own a cat?" And then the second one is, "What are you making?" That's
Mhm.
it. That's how it works. So yeah,
Oh,
that's my
yeah, that'll
cat
humble
story. But
you.
anyways,
That'll humble you a little hair will just take you down.
a little
Build
hair,
build up
a
your
little hair.
immunity at the gym and start, like, sniffing some cat hair little by little, and then grow to the point where you can take one in the eye and not let it take
No,
you.
I want nothing to do. No, I want
No,
nothing
okay.
to do with it. Yeah,
Not part of your
nothing to do
workout
with it.
routine.
No,
Yeah, we
no.
got away to Colorado after Christmas, and it was beautiful. We went to a little town called Silverton. It was a 600 person town. Like, it was just super small, and it's
600?
surrounded by these
Wow.
mountains, covered in snow, little ski resort town. And the tricky part was that there's these passes to get there, like one coming up from Durango that's an hour, and one coming up from Telluride on the other end that's an hour. And this pass was like sheer cliff, icy cliff, no
Mm,
guardrails,
mm.
driving through, and thankfully there wasn't like a blizzard because they can shut down these roads. And once you're in the town, like, my mind is like a planner and sometimes fearful, and I'm like, there's no hospital in this town, there's no car repair place. Like, if we get stuck, or if we need have an emergency, we have to drive an hour through the pass to Durango in the middle of the night.
Right,
So
right.
anyway, apart from all that, it was very beautiful. Recommend it. It's like
Yeah.
one of those towns you look at and it looks like it belongs like in a Hallmark movie or in a postcard.
Yeah, I saw
Um,
your pictures, man, and some of your videos looked beautiful.
yeah. And then we
Very cool.
went over to Four Corners and stood in four states at the same time. And that was interesting, but also very quick. And you have to pay to do it. And I
You have to
drove up
pay
and
to
I'm
go
like,
stand somewhere?
yeah, to stand in the middle of a circle and say, "Hey, I'm in 4 states at once now, I'm gonna leave." And I drove up and it's like $8, and I'm like, "Well, okay, whatever." And I get up to pay and they're like, "How many in your car?" I was like, "4." And they're like, "Okay, that'll be $32."
Oh
And I'm
my
like, "What?"
goodness.
Like, I was okay with paying
Yeah.
$8 for the car, but I'm not okay paying $30 for to literally walk up like 5 minutes and then walk away. So anyway,
Yeah, I'm all set on that.
can say I did it, but that's what you can expect if you are thinking about going to Four Corners. So, what we're talking about today comes from Carey Nieuwhof's blog, and he actually does this every year. I've not really followed it other years, but he has links to the blog. We'll put a link in the show notes. He has a link to all the church trends every year. He kind of comes out with these are the trends he's seeing. And the title is Seven Church Trends That Will Disrupt 2024. So, these aren't just like, church is going to grow, the church is going to read the Bible, the church is going to preach about
Right.
Jesus. Like, obviously, things are going to still happen that have happened, but these are disrupting
Sure.
trends that are going to take place in 2024, supposedly. And so, short of having Carey Nieuwhof on the podcast, which, hey, if you're listening, you're welcome anytime to come on.
Absolutely.
I love his podcast. It talks to church leaders, and it's really, really one of like my top five that I listen to consistently. And so he has people on during the month of January talking about these trends. And so I thought, hey, why don't we talk about these trends? Since no one asked us, we'll give you our opinion on them. And
Absolutely.
so we're going to do a two-parter. End of part two, we're going to share our thoughts on some trends that we're seeing. And
Mm.
so stay tuned for that as well. But any thoughts before we kick these off?
No, I'm ready to dive in. Let's hit the first one.
All right, first one.
So he mentions the stable church has become an endangered species. Now, what he's speaking to here is usually if a church is like plateauing, staying consistent, that can be a good sign. In fact, there's many churches, that's their story. They run, I mean, most of the times that I've seen it, they run 70 to 150. And every year they lose 10 or 12 people and they gain 10 or 12 people. The next
Right.
year rolls around, they lose 8 or 9 people, they gain 8 or 9 people. And so all the bills are being paid, people are being blessed, communities being impacted. So we're all set. We're all good. And what Carrie's saying here is that is an endangered species and ultimately is going to shift to that kind of church is going to lose ground. And so churches in 2024, they're either growing or they're declining. And it sounds to me, based on what he wrote here, there's really no in between.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just business as usual for churches. You're either in a state of incline or a state of decline. And one of his
Mhm.
stats is 54% of churches are in moderate or significant decline. And that means over half of American churches, the writing's on the wall. So if you're
Right.
in the decline phase, uh, like what would you do if you're decreasing by that much, either moderately or significantly as a church leader? What do you do?
Well, I mean, if you really seen decline, then you have to ask yourself, and these are hard questions to ask yourself as a leader,
Hmm.
but it has to start with you, right? Like you're the leader of the church. So the first question's got to be to yourself. And you need to ask yourself if like you're the guy at that particular place to lead the change. So the change is inevitable. If people are leaving, then it's like, okay, something's got to change. You got to start with yourself. Am I the guy
Right.
to lead that change? Am I going to be the best one to do that? If the answer is yes, well, then cool. Then you got to, great news. Now you have to figure out what the appropriate change is and get that rolling. So I think that's where I would start. Different churches are going to have different answers. Yeah, that's where I would start. What about you? What do you think is important to think through in that?
I think, yeah, assessing yourself first and not just blaming whatever, but like just do some really inward looking thoughts on what's happening, and is it related to you? And have you changed over time? Because if you've been at a place for too long, you can just get complacent. And I
Mhm.
love Craig Rochelle has a leadership podcast, and he talked about decision makers. What do decision makers do? And one of the things that I've been thinking about for a while now, since the podcast came out a few weeks ago, is that what is to ask yourself, what would someone else do if they had your position tomorrow?
Yep.
What would a good leader do if they took over your position tomorrow? What would they do? And so I was thinking, like, what, Craig Rochelle, if he comes into my church and leads it, what would he do tomorrow that he would come in and be like, why the heck are you guys doing this?
Yeah.
And that's a good way to just think about, and I always tell my team at church, to always ask, why do we do what we do? Is it because we've always done it? Is it because this is just what we do for 10 years now? But does it
Mhm.
actually make sense? Does it actually make sense
Right.
for where we're at as a church and the vision that we're going, and to have those tough conversations? And so if that means you need to cancel a program that's been going on for a decade, then that's what you do. You
Right.
need to hire someone that, someone's doing the job of three people. And if you need to hire somebody and he's like, well, we don't have the funds for it. Well, you better get the funds, or you're
Yeah.
going to burn that person out, or you're not going to have those programs anymore. And so when you think about, if someone else takes over your job tomorrow, if someone else was the husband in your family, if someone else was the CEO of your job, like what would they do differently if they took over tomorrow, if that person's a strong leader? And I was also talking to a church leader as well recently, and he was moving on from the church, and I was asking him like, hey, there's growth. This church is like going where you have kind of vision to it. And he brought up that he's kind of like Moses, like he brought it to a point, but he can't take it into the promised land.
Yeah.
And for him to be able to say that, and have that awareness of his abilities, was a bold move, was something to be
Very.
lauded. And
Mhm.
so I think, if your church is declining, to really assess first, what are we doing? What are we doing wrong? What are we doing that maybe we did with some veracity 5 years ago, but that's kind of died off?
Yep.
And then after that, if you've done that, then you can start to assess like the culture, the area you're in, the programs, the overall deconversion of America. I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah.
societal trends that will start to affect churches that are declining.
I will say this, one thing I'm encouraged by is the stable church becoming an endangered species to me means that relationships are going to be important because like a relationship is always moving forward or backwards. It's not just like, oh yeah, no, like we're just here. Like
Yeah.
if you're either pursuing someone or you're not pursuing them.
Yeah.
And so what this tells me is that like people are going to start having needs for true, authentic community and relationship. And if they're not getting that, they're going to leave. So there is no like coming and sticking around and sticking it out to see if, eventually this will all work out. It's like, no, like it's kind of the Tinder style of the dating world. It's like, we're going to swipe left or swipe right. And
Yeah.
you're either the church or you're not. And that means for us, like every Sunday and everything we put out on social media and everything we do. Not saying that you need to have a spirit of excellence, but you do need to have a spirit of like, this could be the Tinder profile. This could be the swipe left, swipe right. This could be the decision maker that somebody has. And at the same time, like, it should put some weight to what we do.
Yeah.
So, and, I'm encouraged. I mean, personally, I'm encouraged by it. Kind of scares me a little bit too, trying to grow a church. And there's a couple Sundays over Sunday that you don't see growth and you're wondering, oh man, am I declining?
Mhm.
But ultimately, like, our role as leaders is to cast vision. And once we've topped one mountain, we point to the next mountain.
Yeah.
So, this is going to require great leaders, and churches that don't have great leaders are probably going to be in the decline.
And it really depends, like I said, a lot of where you're at. Like if you're in a liberal city that is rapidly declining, then you really have to have different goals for your church. Like maybe you're
True.
going to be more evangelistic in nature. Maybe you're going to get out
Yep.
into the city and serve more instead of just like, hey, we have a building, why aren't you showing up? Right? There's
That's
there's
a
a
really
big
good point.
part of understanding where you're at and not expecting just people to cater to you because of the stigma that church has in a lot of people's minds right now. And so that's why there is a dechurching, but that's also why the church needs to step up. And a lot of church growth that is labeled is often because you're stealing from other churches, right? Like a church just closed and like, hey, we just gained 30 people. Well, those were already Christians. That's not the Great
Right.
Commission of converting people to Christ. So you
We've
have to
gone
look
up
at
by
that. So
300% this year.
yeah, but two churches closed down. And so
Yep.
you just absorb them. But, if you are declining, like look at other churches, like play nicely with the churches in your area. Maybe you can have a partnership. Maybe you can pull your resources together and have one church if you're both declining. Like that's not a
Yes.
bad strategy. Like
It's
this,
almost like partnership would be
it's
great.
almost like, yeah, building the kingdom together. And one part in here too that Carrie said is that many are simply moving from dying churches to vibrant churches. And so,
Yep.
yeah, if you walk into a service and it looks dead and people aren't greeting and people aren't loving and people aren't even clapping their hands and raising their hands and worship is just going through the motions and people leave, what's going to keep what's going to bring an 18-year-old who's seeking answers for life, what's going to bring them to your church? Are they
Yeah,
going to
dead
get
faith is not
answers?
attractive. Yeah,
No.
there's nothing attractive about a dead spirit, dead faith. And so,
Right.
our role is to be driven, and our role is to, you know, whether we're in the waiting or whether we've been told what's next, our job is to worship with all of that we have and be the light of the world, be the salt of the earth. And
Hmm.
if we're not able to gather together and get past coffee and donuts, it's going to be a tough time to really excite people about anything.
Yeah. Cool. Number two, trends that will disrupt 2024. Millennials are the new core of your church. So one of the
Now, are
most
you a
significant,
millennial?
yeah, it's technically, yeah. I think the cutoff's 81 and I was born in 80. So is that the cutoff? I have to look it up real quick.
I don't know. I depending on where you look, decides if
Different,
I'm a
right?
millennial or not. So I was born in 1986,
Hmm.
and my wife was born in a in an earlier year, and
Yeah.
she says she's not a millennial, but I am.
Yeah, I'm technically Gen X. Millennials are 81 to 96. So millennials have embraced church attendance faster than any other demographic, surpassing their attendance levels back in 2019. So millennial attendance is surging, especially among non-white millennials. According to a Barna survey, 30% of white millennials report attending church regularly post 2020, up from 26% pre pandemic. But non
Wow.
white millennials have returned with even greater zeal. Fully 40% of non white millennials say they are attending church post COVID, up from 31% pre pandemic. So that's a good trend.
I mean, look, we're doing everything we can here. As the spokesperson for millennials, we're doing everything we can.
Yes. What
Yeah.
brings you to church, Drew? Like you represent all the millennials. So,
Yeah. And honestly, like if you look at our church, we are full of millennials. We honestly, we're not only full of millennials, but 30% of our congregation is under the age of 25 right now. So
mhm.
we're also very much it's Gen Z is the next one, right?
Yeah, to
Yeah. So
96.
like
Yeah.
so we're very much full of that as well. But yeah, I mean, this just means that This means that things are different when it comes to how you communicate, means things are different when it comes to technology. And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
And things are different with how you communicate outside of Sunday. And to be real with you, like, the millennial behavior. Okay. I'm part of the millennial behavior. The millennial behavior is anything we look at, we think that there's a better way to do it.
Yeah.
Just being real. I can walk into a restaurant having never owned a restaurant, and I think I know the best way to run that restaurant. I don't. Now, the difference is I keep my mouth shut. Some of the more famous millennials don't. And so that's how, we just get branded a certain way. Also, purpose is really important to us. It's really important. That's one of the reasons the workforce is having such a hard time, is because we're trying to hire millennials and we're trying to hire them in businesses. And what we're speaking to is, if you'll put in this much work, you'll make this much money. What we want to know
Right.
is, what's the impact? So yeah, and of course, I don't know how everybody feels, but I think that's something that's got to be made aware to our
Yeah.
churches.
And I think from, coming off of Gen X and the boomers, I think with millennials, there's more of the why of why do we do what we do? Like I said before, not just my parents did it, my parents did it, and it's just something we always have done. I think there's more of the questions. There's more of the questions of, okay, let's dive into this a little bit. Why do we believe this? Why did I grow up this
Mhm,
way? Am I
mhm.
just Christian because I was born in a Christian household? Like, there's a lot of probing questions that I think need to be addressed by the church, and sometimes topics that are avoided. And so to get answers, you find them in other ways. You find them on social media, you find them in asking your liberal friends, and then all of a sudden you go down this path of deconstructing is the word now,
Yep.
We'll actually talk about that on a future episode, because it is something that, what spurs that on is usually a foundation that's not rooted. And Jesus said to build your
Right.
foundation on him, and when the winds and waves comes, you'll maintain, you'll stand firm. And so if your foundation was never strong to begin with, if you were just riding the coattails of your parents' faith, then yeah, when the waves of life hit and when you're faced with the health diagnosis or someone dies, you start to question, what is the
Mhm.
point of life? Why am I
That's correct.
even here? And if there is no God, then I'm going to just live for myself and get everything I can. And, this trend also talks about that millennials will face one of the biggest wealth transfers in human history. And so they're going to, and they have been inheriting money. So they're going to be a very wealthy segment of society. And based on where their values are, is where they're going to put their money. And so they're going to invest in things that they relate to.
Right.
So churches should be nice to your millennials because,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those are all great points. The third thing that he brought up, I think, is really important. Gen Z will start to reshape the church. That's fun to say. Gen Z will start to reshape the church. And anyone listening to this is going, cool. Yeah, no, that's great. Okay. So, so what that means is you're going to have to lean in. You're going to have to ask some questions. You're going to have to find out what they want. You're going to have to put them into like opportunities of ownership. You're
hmm
going to have to give them responsibility. And what happens?
yeah,
This is part of it. And I think one of the best things, and listen, I love bragging on my church. I do. Not because I think I'm getting everything right. I just think our people have saved me from myself a little bit. Like they're incredible. And so I love bragging on our church. But one of the greatest things that we've done is the first Sunday of every month, we do what's called student takeover. This is where students literally do everything. And I mean everything.
yeah,
I had a 16-year-old preach a message. The students lead worship. The
yeah.
students do production. The students do guest experience. The
I love
students
that.
are with adults in kids ministry. And we do it every single month, the first Sunday of the month. And man, you want to talk about big Sundays? You think Easter's important? Have mom and dad come look at little Johnny singing on stage. Have mom and dad come watch little Johnny serving in the parking lot. We get moms and dads, grandparents, aunts and uncles. They all go to different churches. That's fine. But they show up that Sunday and they know that when we say we believe in reaching the next generation and setting them up and discipling them and trying to make them successful, they know we mean it because we
Yeah.
don't just say stuff like that. We show it.
Yeah.
And now I've got like I had a student pull me to the side the other day and ask if like he could with his phone on Sundays do some social media stuff for us. I'm like, please do, because I
Yeah.
don't understand TikTok. So I'd love that. Had another guy pull me to the side. Hey, my Fellowship of Christian Athletes meets on this Tuesday. And because of some things that I've been able to do here at the church, I finally feel confident enough and bold enough to speak. So will you pray for me Tuesday morning? Because I'm going to be speaking to about 100 kids at my school and telling them about my faith. I'm just like, what? What? Yeah, I didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
I just gave them a place. I just gave them an opportunity. What they
Yeah.
do with it is up to them. So yeah, you've got to lean into that or we're going to have a lot of churches. And, this was my story too, where mom and dad goes to church, the student goes to church, then the student is old enough to make their own decisions. They don't come to church anymore.
Right.
And we can't have that. I'm just telling you, we can't have that. I'm so sick of it. That happened with my generation. Almost everybody I know had a story like me. I grew up in church. Something happened. I didn't like it. I went away from the church, and now they're either still away from the church or now they're back. And I'm just telling you, like, it's not going to happen. Like, it's not
Yeah.
going to happen. It can't happen on my watch. It can't happen on yours. Can't happen on our watch. So
Right.
we have to lean into Gen Z. And that means we got to be okay with them doing some things that are questionable and maybe we wish they wouldn't
Yeah.
have done, and then correcting when it happens. That means that we got to be okay with letting go, right?
Yeah.
And that's what great leaders do. Leaders let go, right?
Yep.
Leaders let go. Managers don't let go.
Right.
Managers tell you how to do things. Leaders let go. So
Yeah.
hopefully that's what the church does.
That's really good both in church and in business world. Like if you're going to micromanage something, you're going to be stressed out and you're going to work extra. But if you start
Yep.
growing leaders who can do this stuff that you've done for so long, if you can let that go, you'll not only have peace, but you'll also be in a position where you can step away or take vacation or turn over the company if you need to somebody
Oh
else.
my
And I
goodness. Yeah.
like it's just a win. And I think in church too, Kerry Newhoff talked about this as well. He had some young leaders on the podcast and he really, I didn't even think about this, but previous generations, kids grew up working in factories at young ages, right? Which is not good, but they were entrusted with more at a younger age. And now we've kind of
Yep.
turned into, oh, you're 30? Well, let's give you another 10 years before I give you something to do. It's like, what?
Yeah, what is that, by the way? Like,
Yeah.
why is that? Because that was my experience, and
Mhm.
I wasn't smart. I'm still not smart. Like, so I'm not saying like somebody should have given me something because I was like a smart kid, but I didn't even think there was a chance at church growing up that I would do anything other than like whatever my parents wanted me to do.
Yeah. I think it just comes down to control, like feeling like you have to control it and not trusting people. But the thing is, when you look at someone, you're like, oh, they can't do it. Well, you're also not being willing to mentor them and show them how to do it. You're just
Thank you.
You're just diminishing them before they even had the opportunity. So it comes from a place of laziness and just, I think, distrust. But it is, I think it's weird how ages kind of work now, where 50 used to be old. And now it's like, the people that look 50, 60 today look like they did in their 40s before. And now
Right.
people in their 80s look like they did when they were 60 back in the 80s. And it's just a weird thing with ages and how people have kind of maintained their youngness with
Right.
whatever
Right.
reason is causing that. But my point is that, as people get older and can, not just retire at 60 or whatever, they're trying to hold the keys and the reins instead of releasing that to the younger generation. And I think
Yep.
both can happen, but I also think it's dangerous where, the average senior pastor in America is turning 60 this year. So if
Really?
that's not a healthy model, if those people retire, pass away, move on, where you haven't grown. Carrie has this tweet too. Gen Z doesn't just want a seat at your table, they'd like a voice and a vote, and they deserve one.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, like, I don't wanna, like, lead a church till I'm 60. I'm not saying that I don't wanna be, like, an advisor,
Yeah.
or I don't wanna be involved somehow, but preaching every Sunday from now when I'm 37 till 60, what a boring existence that seems like.
Yeah, you can
Like,
move on to
and
do
it would be
something you're more passionate about or more
well,
gifted
and can
in,
I get a
maybe.
challenge?
I
Do you know how
mean,
easy it is to write a sermon when you're 60 and you've been doing it for 20, 30 years? Come on, man. Like, give
you
me a
have
challenge.
you have 5 plus years of sermons, and you guarantee that no one will remember a sermon you preached 5 years
Yeah,
ago.
I'm
Just
gonna
pull it
preach
out.
some right. We're just repetition, baby.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can't believe that stat of they're gonna turn 60. Gen Z does need a voice. Now, I will say this is my own criticism because I don't want to just sound like, oh, I figured it out with this whole student takeover thing. My own criticism to myself is this. Sometimes I will hand the keys to someone and I haven't taken the time to teach them how to drive.
right.
So sometimes there will just be a car and I'll be like, hey, man, you want to do that? Here are the keys.
And then you blame them
And so,
looking at
and there you go. And then they wreck the car. And I'm like, what are you doing wrecking the car? It's like, well, I just, I just took the keys, man.
yeah,
So we have to be intentional. And honestly, one of the best things I've done is I've just explained that to students and young adults. I've been like, hey, can I just be honest with you for a second? Sometimes in the past, I've had a hard time with handing people too much responsibility without giving them direction. So
sure.
I want you to hold me accountable in that. And I want to make sure that you ask really good questions. I want to make sure when I say, do you know what I mean? You really know what I mean. I want to make sure when I say questions like, so say that back to me, you can do that. You're ready for that kind of response. And I want to make sure we're on the same page because I never want to set you up to fail. So here are the keys. Let's talk about how to drive. And then it's not like me teaching them, pressuring them, lording over them. They understand the backstory. Like, I'm here for you. I want you to be successful. But, you know, I haven't always done that well in the past. I want to do that well this time.
Yeah, that's an awesome caveat. I love that. So
Yeah,
include Gen Z. They're needed, they're wanted, and churches that don't need or want them will not have them. You'll have churches
that's
that
right.
are 60 plus average attendance, and good luck finding a younger generation to come in. That's a dying church right there.
And for me, like Gen Z is going to be leading my kids. So they better be right.
Hmm.
Like we got to get it. We got to get it because I need my kids to get it.
Right. And real quick, like
Yeah.
going back to understanding what your church is involved in and how it's responding to the community, like understanding the age ranges and structures of your church is so crucial because if you're not serving one of those generations, you're going to lose them. And we've
Hmm.
seen that time and time again. I mean, seniors, like there's so much value in seniors and the wisdom they have and the fact that, they're not going to maybe run circles around you or be there 40 hours a week, but they don't have to be. They can mentor, they can have, wisdom and say into the next generation as well. And so don't discount your seniors either. So,
Yep.
next one, number 4 is discipleship has a growing digital component.
My favorite one.
Oh yeah, I love this one too. Churches that are changing really starting with 2020 when it's like, hey, we need to do live stream, let's figure this out, where so many
Right.
ignored it for years and years, even though many churches were doing live stream, it came out of necessity. And what
Right.
churches are finding digitally is that the more that you ignore it and the more that you act like social media doesn't exist, the more that you're going to be
Right.
left behind when people try to find resources and they can't find you.
You're exactly
And
right.
and this specifically is talking about discipleship, not just social media, and that's a component of it. But uh, what do you think, Drew? Just your thoughts on discipleship specifically digitally? Normally
Well,
discipleship in churches would be a group, a life group, some kind of in
correct.
person function separate from Sunday morning, maybe a one on one mentorship or an actual group itself. How do you think that can translate to digitally?
Well, first of all, in a lot of ways, but I think you got to start with what you define it as. As a church, we throw out a lot of terms, community, discipleship, and then someone comes along and goes, oh, what is discipleship? And you go, well, discipling others. And it's like, what is discipleship? Does everyone in your church know what discipleship means? Does everyone in your church know what community means?
Mhm.
Chances are they don't. So you have to define discipleship. Our friend on a podcast recently said discipleship is discipling people to disciple other people.
Right.
I think that's a great definition. If you want to rework the words and make it a Facebook post, go for it. But discipling people is about discipling other people, not getting necessarily in a group and teaching them. That's teaching. We
Mhm.
want to disciple people. So that means that whole Gen Z that you were talking about, we want to disciple Gen Z so that they can then go to college and have a Bible study in their dorm room. So
Mhm.
we don't want to just teach them, we want to disciple them so that they can then disciple others. So if that's
Sure.
the definition that we're going to go with, that changes then what digital components look like of discipleship. Because if you just look at what most churches are doing, their version of digital discipleship, most churches, I'm not saying all churches, but most churches, their version of digital discipleship is here's our sermon from this past Sunday.
Yeah.
Here are 3 Instagram reels during the week of what our pastor said this past Sunday. There's a trend if you haven't noticed.
Mhm.
And then here's this collage of pictures from this past Sunday. We post something like Sunday was great. Sunday was fire. Sunday was amazing. God really moved. That's my favorite one. God moved in such a special way. God moved in such a unique way. God is in the building. Well, that's
Stop reading my
great.
posts.
Stop, right? But is that discipleship? Well, no, that's marketing.
Yeah.
That's celebrating, however you want to look at it, but that's not discipleship. So, what that means is, as hard as this is to hear, and as hard as this is even for me to live out, because I'll be honest with you, this is my favorite one. The reason this is my favorite one is because we do not do this well. We will. Give me
We'll
6
have to.
months. We're going to do this really well.
Yeah.
But if you're going to be able to do a small group at your home, then you can do a small group on Zoom.
Mhm.
If you can do a small group in the church, then you can do a small group on Zoom. If you don't have childcare at your church, then you can do a small group on Zoom. Everything you can do in person, you can do on Zoom. Now I get it. Hey, face to face is different than screen time. Oh, absolutely. Screen time is draining.
Mhm.
Face to face is almost energizing. I totally get it. Then you better figure out a way to get energized. You better figure
Right.
out a way to get energized from the screen. If you can't figure it out, you're going to lose. And so
Yeah.
that's where it's got to start. And then who else is talking during the week besides your pastor? So I've got 3, we're going to put up 3 reels of how good the sermon was Sunday. Is that all you got? That's all you got? So you got one dude? You got one dude who loves Jesus and teaches the Bible?
Yeah.
You don't have anybody that's willing to go live during the week, set up an event, create an event, go live during the week and engage with the comments?
Mm.
Are they too scared? Are they worried about production quality? Are you worried nobody will show up and talk in the comments? You just have
All that
one
will
dude.
happen, by the way. Every one
All
of
that
those
will
will
happen.
happen for someone
Everyone
that
will
has gone
happen
live. Yeah.
at first. Yeah, everyone will that'll always happen at first. But if you make it a priority, what I can promise you is you make it a priority, give it 30 days, do it every week. Like if you say Tuesday mornings at 7 a.m., I'm going to have coffee. Will you have coffee with me? We're going to talk about the sermon from Sunday, and I'm not the pastor. Okay, cool. Do that, do it for 30 days. And I guarantee you on that 4th Tuesday of the last month, there's going to be 5 or 6 other people that are sitting down with their coffee and they're going to engage with you and they're going to want to know what you thought about the sermon and they're going to tell you what they thought.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, you start bringing them onto the camera
Right.
and you talk with them and then they bring it. And so round and round we go. So anything you're doing in person, you got to think through the concept of what does this look like digitally? If not, you're going to be one of those churches that 10 years from now goes, we really should add a contemporary service.
Mm.
And I've never heard more dangerous words spoken.
Let's have a service that appeals to every group that comes to our church. Yeah, no, that's dangerous. But
But
I like
that's
what you
what's
said.
happening, right?
Yeah,
That's
I
what's
like what
happening.
you said because it really is about stepping out of your comfort zone. Like it's not comfortable to jump on live. It's not comfortable to try to
No,
interact with a digital resource you're not familiar with.
that's
And
right.
if your pastor, if your senior pastor, if someone in the church is not doing that, maybe you can step in if you have a say in their life to offer that up or to offer to set up stuff. Like, hey, literally all you have
Mhm.
to do is show up to this couch and talk for 20 minutes and I'll even give you a topic and I'll hit record and you have to do
Yeah,
nothing. Like you could
that's it.
do that. That could be helpful. But I think this is really an untapped market. And for as much as I'm on social media, like even for our church, like we're still doing the in-person groups. And I love what you said about Zoom groups because why not? Why not offer that? Like
Yeah, why
it's
not?
so much of a all or nothing approach. And, when Kieran Newhoff talks about social media, talks about it's usually done as an evangelism thing or a growth strategy. We're either trying to grow our current group or we're trying to
Right.
evangelize. And those are the two ways you
Right.
see social media. But not just growing, but what about discipling? What about offering something? We have a pastor talk podcast we do to kind of dive deep into a subject that we may not be able to cover on Sunday, you know, but also with that, like the pastors that are out front of this, the ones that are tweeting or Xing, the ones that are doing little short, 2 minute, like, hey, here's me. I'm walking to the gym. I just want to encourage you today to make sure you don't give up on the goals
Yep.
you started for the year. I think this was a year or two ago. I was challenged to do something like a 5 minute video or maybe a 2 minute video every day for 30 days. And so I did a daily discernment thing. And that was very tough, to push yourself to not miss a day
Yeah.
and to come up with something. And turns out I came up with something. And turns out you can come up with something. If you're listening, you have that in you. God's given you abilities and
Mhm.
giftings to be able to share his word, to talk about what you're learning. And so maybe you do that personally. Maybe started my own ministry to encourage people on social media a while back. So maybe it's not just under the context of a church, but if you're listening and you're like, I don't have an avenue for that, you have a phone, you have a way
Yep.
to encourage others. And if you can
Always.
partner with your church and do that, great.
Well, that was 4 of them,
Yep.
and that was fun. And now part
Now
2.
we must end for now.
Yeah, we must end for now, but part 2 is gonna be next week, right? So that's
Yep.
gonna be really exciting. And so if you enjoyed part 1, we wanna hear from you. You can always email the podcast. You can always, reach out to us on social media. But anyway, we can hear some feedback from you. That'd be great. You can email us at eyesonjesuspodcast@outlook.com, and always can hit up Tim on Discerning Dad, or you can look up Drew Barker, and mine's like Drew S. Barker, which is, yeah, I mean, whatever.
Drew's
Just
Barker.
find it. Drew's Barker. Yeah, whatever. And that'll probably need to change. And hey, and share the podcast, like and share the podcast. We'd love to know what your church is looking at going into this year. But as always, go with God, grow in discernment, and keep your eyes on Jesus.